We have a very interesting talk today, and the title of the talk is Mind Over Medicine. Now, some of you may hear something like that and be pretty skeptical, and that's okay. I like that. I welcome skepticism. I like skeptics because it means you're thinking, you're questioning. And that's important so that you just don't fall for anything. You have to have your own mind. So, even if you're skeptical, I want to ask that you come with an open mind, because I'm going to present to you not just some random, vague, metaphysical thoughts, but I'm going to present to you science to support the theses that we're presenting today. Now, in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, which is the book of wisdom, in chapter 23, verse 7, there is a verse that says, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." And there was a man by the name of James Allen who wrote a very important book in 1902, and the book was called As a Man Thinketh. And the entire book is based on essentially what we just read. And the book is very, very good, very powerful, very insightful, and I highly recommend it. And the book begins with a very powerful quote. It says this: "The aphorism, 'as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he,' not only embraces the whole of a man's being, but is also comprehensive as to reach out to every condition and circumstance of his life. A man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts." Now, typically when we look at something like the subject of the effect of our thoughts, we think of our character, right? Because of course, right, what you think is really what composes who you are, right? But it goes even deeper than that, okay? Because while thoughts do very much influence our character, James Allen makes a very powerful point in chapter 3 of his book, because the chapter is entitled "The Effects of Thought on the Health and Body." Now, some of us may have an intuitive understanding that this is the case, that there is a connection between mind and body, but we might not have the science behind it. And I'm telling you, there is a mountain of evidence supporting the connection and the correlation between thoughts and physical health. And so in his chapter, "The Effect of Thoughts on Health and the Body," he says this: "The body is the servant of the mind. It obeys the operations of the mind, whether they be deliberately chosen or automatically expressed. At the bidding of unlawful thoughts, the body sinks rapidly," it sinks rapidly into disease and decay. "At the command of glad and beautiful thoughts, it becomes clothed with youthfulness and beauty. Disease and health, like circumstances, are rooted in thought." Did you hear what he said? Disease and health, like circumstances, are rooted in thought. He is making the case that your character isn't the only thing that is affected by your thoughts. It is your body. Your physical health is affected by the mind. He goes on to say, the people who, the thoughts of fear, I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. Sickly thoughts will express themselves through a sickly body. Thoughts of fear have been known to kill a man as speedily as a bullet, and they are continually killing thousands of people just as surely, though less rapidly. The people who live in fear of disease are people who get it. Anxiety quickly demoralizes the whole body and lays it open to the entrance of disease, while impure thoughts, even if not physically indulged, will soon shatter the nervous system. So you might hear something like this, and you might think, well, that's fine. That sounds interesting, but James Allen isn't a doctor. So what does he really know, right? That might be something you're thinking. So let's ask the question: does science support the theses of James Allen? So we're going to take a look at some interesting quotes from a medical doctor, a traditional Western medicine practitioner by the name of Dr. Lissa Rankin. She wrote a book called Mind Over Medicine, and that's where we got our title for today's talk. She was asked a question in an interview, and the question was, you've become quite the advocate for mind-body medicine. Was there a major turning point that left you questioning the controversial approach to medicine? And she responded by saying this: when I was working with sick patients from the inner city of Chicago, it made sense that they weren't healthy. They ate poorly, they smoked, they drank, they never exercised. And she worked with a lot of people who had a lot of bad habits in the hood, right? Conventional wisdom would tell you that these people should be sick. But she goes on and she says, but then I took a job at an integrative medicine practice in posh Marin County, which is in the Bay Area. That's the North Bay, right across the Golden Gate Bridge, very affluent place with lots of affluent people who have access to things that somebody in the inner city of Chicago probably wouldn't have access to. She says, where my patients religiously followed organic, vegan diets, worked out with personal trainers, got 8 hours of sleep every night, took their vitamins, and spent a fortune on the best healthcare that money can buy, and they were still sick. It got me wondering, what if there's more to health than what they taught me in medical school? So here is a medical doctor, a practicing medical doctor, mainstream medicine, and she is now starting to question whether or not she had been given the full picture while in medical school. Because what you all have to understand is sometimes we're taught things, but we're not always taught the full picture, maybe for a number of reasons. Maybe they haven't discovered certain things. We have to keep an open mind, and we can't be stagnant in terms of our thoughts and our understanding, and we have to be constantly willing to grow. And that's why it is important that you continually do your own research, continually study into these most important topics, just like Dr. Lissa Rankin did. And look at what happened when she began to question whether or not there might be more to health than what she had been taught in medical school. She continues and she says, around the same time, I became fascinated with case studies in medical literature of something called spontaneous remission from seemingly incurable illness. So, for example, when doctors tell you you have stage 4 lymphoma, or they give you some kind of very unfortunate diagnosis, you've been diagnosed with AIDS or whatever, we have been taught that those are incurable diseases, that they will be with us for the rest of their lives, and all that the Western medical system does is essentially manage disease, right? And what she was finding out was that there was a phenomenon called spontaneous remission. And here's a definition of spontaneous remission from Wikipedia. It says spontaneous remission, also called spontaneous healing or spontaneous regeneration, is an unexpected improvement or cure from a disease that usually progresses. These terms are commonly used for unexpected transient or final improvements in cancer. What that means is your body did a complete about face, a complete 180, and instead of dying or progressively getting worse from that quote unquote incurable disease, you actually got better and completely better. That's why they call it spontaneous remission. And she started to look at these case studies of spontaneous remission, reading the medical literature, and she started to say, whoa, there's something else to this. I'm getting a bigger piece of the puzzle. I'm seeing more of the picture. And she explains how she started to figure it out. Now, she wasn't, a homeopath, a naturopath, one of these holistic medical practitioners. Again, she was a mainstream Western medical practitioner, but she started to stumble upon something very powerful. And she continues when she says this. She said, she saw stage 4 cancers that disappeared, an HIV positive patient who became HIV negative. You ever heard that? Right? It's out there. It's in the medical literature. Why are we not talking about this more? That's a great question to ask. And I could go into some reasons why, but I'm not going to do that today. People whose heart disease vanished. I got curious whether there was any scientific validity to what some of the New Age gurus teach that you can heal yourself. I wondered whether we might have control over whether we're blessed with spontaneous remission from illness or whether we stay sick. And I'll give you a little spoiler alert if you haven't already been able to tell by the title. You can influence your outcome. You don't have to succumb to illness and disease. It is possible. I'm not saying it's always going to happen, but it is possible for us to have a different outcome other than what medicine tells us, other than what the doctor tells us. And she's proving that by citing these cases of spontaneous remission. So the interviewer kind of, with a very quizzical sort of tone says, "What do you mean when you say you can heal yourself?" Because it's a very strange concept, right? Dr. Rankin goes on to say, the medical establishment has been proving that the body can heal itself for over 50 years. We call it the placebo effect. We've been trying to outsmart it for decades. We know that in clinical trials, patients being treated with sugar pills, saline injections, and even fake surgeries get better anywhere from 18 to 80% of the time. Did you see that? Sugar pills, saline injections, and even fake surgeries actually cure a patient 18 to 80% of the time. What's going on here? The placebo effect is a thorn in the side, she says, of modern medicine. It's an inconvenient truth that gets in the way of proving that new treatments are more effective than letting nature take its course. But the placebo effect is nothing to be avoided. It should be embraced. Now, why does she say that? Now, she makes her point. She says, because it provides evidence, provides concrete evidence that God designed the body to be equipped with an inherent, innate self-repair mechanism that has the power to reverse even the deadliest diseases. Okay? I mean, it's no wonder why in the book of Psalms it says, in Psalms 139:14, it says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But you have people that are riddled with diseases, of all types, and oftentimes they want to blame God, those who are believers or whatever, but they don't understand that sometimes there's more to it. They have more control over their health and their circumstances than what they think. And if we stop the offending behavior, we will allow the designed self-repair mechanisms in the body to actually become activated. Now, Dr. Rankin goes on and she says, when you cut yourself, your body knows how to mend the cut. When you break bones, the bone knows how to stitch itself back together again. We all make cancer cells every day. The body disposes of them. Infectious invaders, foreign bodies, broken proteins. The body can handle it, assuming that those self-repair mechanisms are functioning properly. So that's what I mean when I say you can heal yourself. The body has natural self-repair mechanisms that can be flipped on or off. Did you hear that? She says the body has natural self-repair mechanisms that can be flipped on or off. This goes both ways. Based on what? She says based on thoughts, beliefs, and feelings that originate in the mind. Isn't that something? Listen to that. She says that the body, this mainstream Western medicine practitioner tells us in no uncertain terms that the body has self-repair mechanisms that can be turned on or off by us based on thoughts, beliefs, and feelings that originate where? Here. So why was it that she was finding that people who lived in posh Marin and had the best organic vegan diets, personal trainers, best health treatment that money could buy, the green juice, the vitamins, got the sleep that they needed, didn't do drugs and any of those things, and just lived a healthy lifestyle, still had the same diseases as people in inner city Chicago. Because what was even greater than your, now I'm not suggesting that you can be happy and go out and eat whatever crawls across your plate and do drugs and things like that and be a healthy person. But what I am saying is that even if you do the right things as far as your physical health is concerned, if your mind is not right, it will oftentimes nullify the effects of those good lifestyle choices by turning off the body's self-repair mechanisms. Okay? So let's look at what she says, because the interviewer gets very, very curious about this thing that she just said. The interviewer says, "What do you mean when you say you can flip your self-repair mechanisms on or off? If the body knows how to repair itself, why would we ever want to turn them off?" This is a great question, right? So if our bodies knows how to repair itself, why in the world would we ever want to turn off those self-repair mechanisms? Well, nobody does unless you're suicidal, right? That's not, most people want to be healthy and want to live long, right? Of course. Um, but so that's a logical question. Here's what Dr. Rankin says. She says, "This was one of the most shocking things I discovered. The nervous system has two modes of operation." Listen, the nervous system has two modes of operation: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Let me say that again: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is dominant during what Walter Cannon at Harvard termed the stress response, also known as fight or flight. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system is the dominant system that is taking control of your body during the stress response or fight or flight. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is in charge during what Herbert Benson at Harvard called the relaxation response, which is the opposite of the stress response. So you have the sympathetic nervous system, because there's two parts to the two modes of operation for the nervous system. There's a sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what's in control during the stress response, also known as fight or flight. And the parasympathetic nervous system is in control during what is called the relaxation response, which is the opposite of the stress response. Now, listen to this. This is key. Okay, I know it's getting real deep, but for those of you who like science, I'm giving it to you in a big fat dose today. Okay, Dr. Rankin says, only when the relaxation response is in effect do the body's natural self-repair mechanisms function properly. Did you hear that? So there's two modes of operation for the nervous system: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what's active during the stress response or fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is what is in control and active during the relaxation response. And then she goes on to say unequivocally, in no uncertain terms, that only when the relaxation response is in effect do the body's natural self-repair mechanisms function properly. So how do we turn off the body's natural self-repair mechanisms? By allowing the sympathetic nervous system, the stress response, the fight or flight response to take control. She goes on and she says, it makes sense. When your body is preparing to fight or flee, it needn't worry about preventative maintenance, right? Why bother eating up cancer cells or repairing broken proteins when you're about to get eaten by a cave bear? The stress response exists to protect you. It's meant to get you out of harm's way when your life's in danger. But these days, the average person, listen, the average person, she says, has 50 stress responses per day. Not per month, not per week, per day. The average person has 50 stress responses per day. Is it any wonder why we have so much chronic illness. Now, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have something called the health message, where generally we eat clean foods. Many people are vegetarian, some even vegan. We abstain from the use of tobacco or drugs, caffeine, stimulants, alcohol, things like that. So you would think that with a group of people that claim the health message as a big part of their message to the world, that you wouldn't see these diseases. And yet you find Seventh-day Adventists every day that are dying of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and any number of chronic illnesses. How in the world is that so? Because even if you are doing all the right things, like this group of people here that I just mentioned, or like these people who lived in Posh Marin at the medical center that she began to work at, even if you're doing all the right things in terms of lifestyle, if this isn't right, if the mind isn't right, and if the body is in a constant state of fight or flight, where the stress response is constantly being activated because its parasympathetic nervous system is constantly flipped on, then in those situations, the body's self-repair mechanisms are turned off. And then all of those stress hormones, cortisol, epinephrine, all those things can just flood the body. And now you're in a constant loop of negative thought, negative feelings. You're nervous, you're wringing your hands. Why do you think there is so much anxiety in the world? Because people haven't figured out how to activate the relaxation response. Why do you think there's so much chronic illness in the world? For that very same reason. She says, it's no wonder chronic illnesses are at epidemic levels. Every time you have a stressful thought, belief, or feeling, your brain spits out harmful disease-inducing stress hormones like cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine that shut off your body's self-repair mechanism. Let me say that again. Every time you have a stressful thought, belief, or feeling, your brain spits out stressful disease-inducing hormones like cortisol, epinephrine, or norepinephrine that shut off your body's self-repair mechanisms. Let me ask you, how often do you have a stressful thought? How often do you have a stressful belief or feeling? How often are you sitting in a negative thought loop where you're just constantly worried about something that could come in the future, hypothetical situations that could happen? How many of you live in fear every day? Fear about what could happen to your finances, fear of what could happen to your children, fear of what could happen to your marriage. How many of you are sitting there living in a constant state of fear? Well, guess what? If that is where you are in life, your body's self-repair mechanisms are not functioning properly. And if you stay in that state for a prolonged period of times and you don't find a way to find peace, to find a way to trigger the relaxation response and the parasympathetic nervous system, then you are on the road to chronic illness and maybe even an early grave. Who wants that? Who wants that? She goes on and she says, on the other hand, every time you have positive thoughts, positive beliefs or feelings, you can release healing hormones like oxytocin, nitric oxide, dopamine, and endorphins that shift you to the relaxation response, where your body can get to work repairing what's broken. That's how you do it. You got to trigger the relaxation response. You know, oxytocin, she talks about that. You know where oxytocin comes from? Physical touch, right? They say that, just 30 seconds of physical touch, hugging your spouse, holding their hand, sitting next to them, things like that, can trigger a release of oxytocin in the body. It's amazing the way that our bodies are designed. So, when your body is in that relaxation response and the parasympathetic nervous system is in control, that's where the body's self-repair mechanisms can be activated and get to work repairing what's broken. And you say, okay, well, I don't know. I mean, that's one doctor. I'm still not convinced. Okay. Well, I have an article entitled The Power of the Relaxation Response, a behavioral medicine pioneer reports on a time-tested technique that reverses aging and improves health. Now, I'm not saying that I have this all down perfect and all figured out perfectly, but I am saying that I generally don't stress off much because the way I look at it is the same God who has kept me alive through many, many very dangerous and difficult situations where I was on the verge of being killed on multiple times when I was running the streets back in my youth. That same God can take care of whatever little problems I have today. And so I just kind of, I mean, having grown up in the streets, I've been shot at literally on multiple occasions, people trying to murder me. Okay. My cousin got shot right in front of me. So this is what I grew up in. And I feel like whatever problems I have to face today are cake compared to that. And so, you know, people look at me and they don't realize that I'm 44 years old. You know, I am 44 years old. People oftentimes think that I'm in my early 30s, sometimes even my late 20s. So I'm not saying that I'm that's a bad thing. What I'm saying is when you find the secret to that relaxation response, it can improve health and reverse aging. Okay. Now I also understand that I have a lot of melanin in my skin and black don't crack, but that's besides the point. I believe that this can work for anybody. And ladies, I know we wanna slow that aging process as much as possible. And guess what? The relaxation response is how you do it. Okay. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna read you some of this article because I wanna let the doctors talk, not Michael Buffington. Says one of the most powerful tools a psychologist can use is actually nothing new, said Herbert Benson. Now, you remember Lissa Rankin mentioned Herbert Benson earlier. He's an MD at an APA's annual convention. In fact, it's an approach that has been around for millennia, yet its full potential remains untapped. Benson was referring to the relaxation response, a physical state of deep rest that changes a person's physical and emotional response to stress. Notice she said physical and emotional. Stress is not just here, it's everywhere. Says Benson of Harvard Medical School and the Benson Henry Institute for Mind Body Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital discovered the relaxation response's power to reduce stress in the 1960s. How come we don't hear more about this? How come every time we're sick, all we hear about is what drug can help us feel better? We never hear about this stuff. I wonder why. That's another talk for another time. But his subsequent research found that the approach is really no different from what people have done for centuries through prayer. Did you hear that? Through prayer, chanting, and repetitive motion. Today, scientists have shown that such practices lower heart rates, blood pressure, and oxygen consumption, and they alleviate the symptoms associated with a vast array of conditions, including hypertension, arthritis, insomnia, depression, infertility, cancer, anxiety, and even aging. Wait a minute. You're saying this medical doctor who has dedicated his life to studying the relaxation response, and he even has something called the Benson Henry Institute for Mind Body Health in Massachusetts, that he's actually saying that prayer can can alleviate the symptoms associated with a vast array of conditions, including cancer, anxiety, depression, arthritis, hypertension, even aging. Now you see all these people even within church that struggle with depression and anxiety. Why? The world, even the world, is beginning to understand the power of the relaxation response that can be triggered by prayer. So maybe, ladies, if you want to look younger, you need to start praying more, right? It says, you as psychologists, Dr. Benson says, can use the mind like you would use a drug. And he says this should empower you in your practices. So he's saying that oftentimes people for anxiety will prescribe certain medicines, but if we could just get people to learn how to trigger the relaxation response, then maybe that's the first step, right? And they go on to talk about experiments that they've done where they have actually studied that the body's gene expression changes. He says in this study, his team of researchers looked at how the relaxation response affected each of the body's 40,000 genes and found that compared with the control group, those who regularly use the relaxation response triggered by things like prayer induced antioxidation and anti-inflammatory changes that counteracted the effects of stress on the body. Come on. Now, he talks about eliciting the relaxation response, okay? And he says the relaxation response is simple. He explained that once or twice a day for 20 minutes, in a relaxed position, eyes closed, and repeat a word or sound as you breathe. Some people use words like love or peace. Others say traditional prayers. If your thoughts stray, which is normal and expected, just refocus on the word repetition or whatever. This is his sort of way of triggering the relaxation response. But notice how much this sounds just like prayer. He even mentions this. He mentions how others say traditional prayers. There are scores of other ways to summon the relaxation response as well, as that breaks the train of everyday thought and will evoke this physiological state of the relaxation response. That includes participating in repetitive sports such as running, maybe walking, right? Just walking by a beautiful lake or somewhere nice and just letting your thoughts get away from the cares of this world. And he says letting go of tension through progressive muscular relaxation, knitting, crocheting, or even playing music, right? And then he goes on, he says, you know how when you play an instrument, you become one with that instrument and time sort of flits away? That is the relaxation response. And he says, you know the high that you get from running? That is the relaxation response coming out of the repetitive motion of your footfall. So there is something very powerful to this thing called the relaxation response that people who have dedicated their lives to studying understand, right? And here we are, many of us who are professed Christians are sitting here worried, anxious, depressed, angry, stressed out. Why? You know, because what's on the other side of that worry, anger, depression, and stress? Well, you're triggering that stress response, that fight or flight syndrome, which is filling your body with these negative, negative chemicals like cortisol and epinephrine and things like that, and it's taking you down the path towards chronic illness and disease. So regardless of what your lifestyle is like, if you are constantly stressed out and angry and uptight and anxious and things like that, I knew a very well-known guy named Danny Vieira, who was sort of like a health guru and he ended up dying of cancer. But that was because there were some things that were going on in his personal life that were very heartbreaking, and maybe he just hadn't gotten a hold of a way to trigger that relaxation response. Because I thought he was going to live to 100, and I think he passed away at 65. But that's how powerful this is. Okay, and there's even and he ends by saying. He says, given that 60 to 90% of healthcare professional visits are stress-related, the potential of the relaxation response to help people is enormous. I believe this is going to change medicine. Now, I'm going to end with this. This is an article that was originally posted from CNN because apparently, occasionally mainstream media posts something other than propaganda. So this one is called The Psychological Benefits of Prayer, What Science Says About the Mind-Soul Connection. This is from mainstream media. And it talks in depth about how powerful prayer can be in triggering that relaxation response. It says, prayer can reduce feelings of isolation, anxiety, and fear. It says rituals in general serve a calming function. They distract the mind, which might otherwise go down one of those rabbit holes of useless worry, and they give us a sense of influence or control over something that may not be ultimately controllable. A 2009 study, according to the article on the effects of prayer or on depression and anxiety, found that members of a group had lower rates of depression and anxiety and were more optimistic after sessions in which they prayed for one another compared to the control group, which had no prayer sessions. So it's very, very interesting. Also, they compare prayer and meditation. Okay. So, prayer and meditation are different, right? They are systematically different. What prayer entails is working through thoughts and talking to your higher power. In the case of Christians, it's God. And meditation just focuses on clearing the mind. Okay. But listen to this. Prayer also implies the context of a relationship with a higher being rather than a solitary journey. Praying within a relationship with God that feels loving and supportive may help with managing stress and life's challenges. In other words, turning on the relaxation response. A study compared secular and spiritual forms of meditation and found that the spiritual meditation group was less anxious and more positive than the other groups. Did you hear that? So this study compared sort of the secular meditation, just kind of sitting there and emptying your mind, and versus prayer, which is actually communicating with a loving God. And the study showed that when comparing the secular and spiritual forms of meditation versus prayer, it found that the spiritual meditation group, the group that was praying to a loving God, was less anxious and more positive than the other groups. It says in secular meditation, participants centered on words or text of self-affirmation. The spiritual meditation group focused on words that describe the loving nature of God. When the participants submerged a hand in near freezing water for an experiment, the spiritual meditation group tolerated the pain almost twice as long as the other groups. The article goes on to talk about how prayer can reduce anger and aggression and all sorts of wonderful things. So what I'm trying to get across to you is that the mind is very powerful. One of my favorite authors outside of the Bible said that 9/10 of these diseases originate in the mind. Few people understand the power that the mind has over the body. Why was Lissa Rankin, in her experience, finding that rich, affluent people who lived the best lifestyle and had the best healthcare money could buy were still getting sick? Why did James Allen say change of diet will not help a man who will not change his thoughts? Because there is something bigger than this. It's the relaxation response versus the stress response. The stress response turns the body's self-repair mechanisms off. The relaxation response turns them on, allows the body to heal what is broken, and even can reverse aging, ladies. So anyway, I can go much deeper into this, but what you have to remember is that healing, which means literally to become whole, is not just about addressing a certain symptom with a pill. Healing is about addressing the whole body, head to toe, including the mind. And some of us will go to the doctor when we feel sick, but we will never go to a therapist. But you need a checkup from the neck up, as Dr. Carlton Oler would say. So I hope you got something out of this, and I hope that you can use this talk to jumpstart your own research and look up some of these things we talked about and be blessed by it and become healthy and whole and happy and deeper connected to God.